Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I sit here for the 6th time in my 35 square meters of glorious gym empire, ready to answer your questions, and when any of them stress me too much, drink schnapps. That was a preparatory one, just in case. Been getting some good questions lately, so thank you guys for asking them and for listening. Tonight, Lahiro asks, motivation. What key things have you seen in the lifters who have managed to maintain consistent lifting over time? Habit and first step. So, people like to talk about motivation, but listening to a few songs or stirring speeches or whatever will only get you so far and for so long. What tends to work ongoing is that it's just a habit. I don't need motivation to brush my teeth every night before I go to bed. It's just what I do before I go to bed every night. I may need motivation to do a particularly good job, to brush for 3 minutes instead of 2, or to floss or whatever. But just to brush my teeth, I don't need motivation. Likewise with the gym, I don't need motivation to come in and do 2 or 3 of squat, push, pull, hip hinge and loaded carry. I may need motivation to lift particularly heavy, to follow an intelligent program instead of some nonsense I came up with for myself. And I may need motivation to really grind through those heavy reps. But just to do the movements 3 times a week, I don't need motivation for that. So the key there is to make it a habit for yourself, that there are certain times that you work out. As I've said before, comparing it to a job. If you just showed up to work whenever you were motivated to work, you would not achieve much. You would not attend much and you would not achieve much. But Monday, 9 a.m. till 5 p.m, they expect you there. So, you show up. Monday, 9 a.m, you show up and you stick around till 5 p.m, and we hope that you're more or less productive in those 8 hours in between. So you kind of have to treat your workouts the same way, that you just have a habit, that a particular time that you go and work out, and unless something comes up like being sick, as for work, that's what you go and do. It's just habit. And I say first step because quite often when you're feeling kind of so-so about the gym, the most difficult thing is just taking that first step into the gym. So my practice, and that of the successful lifters I've seen, is to show up however awful they're feeling. As I've said before, if you have a fever or if anything is involuntarily coming out of either end of you, we don't want to see you. Aside from that, you show up and do something. You know, if I don't care if you've squatted 200 kilograms in the past and today you have to come in and squat the empty bar. That's going to do you more good than just sitting at home on the couch. Yes. So yeah, the power of habit, of just keep on showing up because that's what you do. And Tuesday 7 p.m, Thursday 7 p.m, there you are in the gym, or whatever times happen to work for you. Yeah, and first step, that however much you don't feel like going, however tired you are, however hungry you are, however sick you are, or whatever, or pissed off or bored or whatever, you just show up. You promise, look, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do something. It may not be what's on the program, but I'm going to do something. 9 times out of 10, once you show up, you're fine. You can do your regular programming. Okay, Rosie asks, what I want to do isn't always available. For example, close grip bench. What alternatives can be used? Well, the first thing I'll say is you should be at a gym where what you want to do is available, even if you have to work in with someone else. If the gym you're in, for example, does not have 15 kilogram bars and you need 15 kilogram bars, well, for your workout, well, first you go and ask them to go and get them. And and if they're unwilling or unable to do so, you find a better gym. This isn't like 10 or 20 years ago when you were lucky if the gym you were at had one half rack and one shitty barbell for the bench press. Nowadays, there are zillions of decent gyms out there that have some good combination of coaching, equipment and camaraderie. So you don't have to put up with a shitty gym that doesn't have the equipment that you need. Now, it will still occasionally happen that you just happen to go at a really busy time, or the equipment you need happens to be up for repair or something like that. So in that case, you go for something same but different. So you would kind of do close grip bench press. You now do close grip dumbbell bench press. Or you get onto the machine press or whatever. You do something as close as you can to that movement. Bearing in mind every workout needs some sort of, or every workout plan, if not every individual workout session, requires some sort of squat, some sort of push, some sort of pull, some sort of hip hinge and some sort of loaded carry. So whichever of those you've got in that workout for that day, you choose a variation. You can't back squat today, okay, you can front squat. You can't bench press today, okay, you can overhead press, and so on. There may be injury issues in an individual's case, but generally speaking, you find the variation of a same but different kind of movement. Lahira asks, shoulder injuries, for example, rotator cuff or supraspinatus impingement. When should you work through the pain and when should you rest? What do you do about them? Well, the first thing to do is to distinguish between being sore and being hurt. One of the big problems that exists in gyms around the world is people who can't tell the difference. Most people fall either on the wuss or the meathead side. The wuss thinks that they are hurt when in fact they're just sore. And the meathead thinks that they're just sore when in fact they're hurt. And obviously, so sore, you just go ahead and train. You ignore it. You'll live. Like muscle soreness after your last workout or whatever. You come and do the same things again and you'll be fine. By the time you get past the first work set, you'll be fine. If you are hurt, well, number one, the question is, do you need medical help? And if you've got medical help, what did they tell you to do? Whatever they told you to do, you do that. We always say, follow medical advice given. Now, if you get medical advice and we think it's stupid, you still follow it today. But we suggest you go and get a second opinion. If that second opinion is the same, well, maybe that advice isn't stupid. Maybe we're stupid and we should listen to that. If that medical advice is different, you choose which you want to follow, which you think is sensible. So, that aside, once you've had a medical opinion on that injury and what to do, or while you're awaiting that, again, we look for, as in Rosie's question, we look for same but different. What is a similar movement that you can do that will not offend that joint in the same way that the originally planned movement did? So, for example, rotator cuff impingement. In here, people will quite often find that doing a bench press inflames it, makes it worse. But they can do a close grip bench press, or they can do an overhead press, and that doesn't make the injury worse. Now, in the case of somebody with a coach or a trainer, a competent coach or trainer should be able to come up with a sensible alternative. By their knowledge of joint anatomy and so on, they should think, well, okay, in that position, the supraspinatus is impinged. In that position, it is not. So we'll do that. We'll just still doing a pushing movement, which will require a different load or whatever, but it shouldn't offend the shoulder in the same way. Similarly with, if it's some knee issue, then, front squat is going to be more offensive to the front of the knee than a back squat will be. If there's a lower back issue, then rack pulls will be less offensive to the lower back than a full deadlift would be, and so on and so forth. So there's always some variation that you can do. So if that's the first thing we do. Well, yeah, if there's any pain, the first thing we do is check the movement. If the movement is bad, we fix it. More often than not, that fixes whatever the pain was. If the movement is good and it still hurts, we go for same but different. Again, some sort of squat, some sort of push, some sort of pull, some sort of hip hinge, some sort of loaded carry. It's not super important which variation you choose in the long run. You just choose a variation which challenges you and does not cause you pain. Now, if every variation causes you pain, if any kind of squat causes you pain, any kind of push and so on, then you definitely need that medical assistance, and maybe more than what you're already getting, if you're already getting some. So, yeah, but the mistake that people make is the ones on the wussy side mistake sore for hurt, and they just do nothing, which never makes things better. And the ones on the meathead side mistake hurt for sore, merely sore, and they just go ahead and do what they were originally planning to do, which makes the injury worse or gives them another injury, and just generally makes life miserable. We want the middle path. Now, when I was chatting to Lihira earlier today, she said, yeah, so guidance for people to steer that middle path between wuss and meathead. And I said, well, get a trainer. Honestly, most people are not good at that. Most people are going to go on the wuss or the meathead side. Not many people are good at setting in between. One of the things we've been doing lately is collecting the data of people who did a starting strength novice linear progression to look at what sort of numbers they got, if they had any previous training, what their age, gender, height and weight was, and their weight before and after those few months. And did they get injured along the way? And what we found was a bit interesting, which was that those training on their own actually went a little bit further in terms of weights lifted than those training with a coach. But 25% of them got injured in the process. And we defined an injury as something severe enough to make them stop the program. Whereas the ones training on their own, it was much less than 10% got injured. So training on your own, the people who reported to us went a bit further, but hurt themselves in the process. Were 2 or 3 times more likely to hurt themselves. So this shows that they erred on the meathead side. So they achieved a bit more until they achieved nothing because they hurt themselves. Because when you're injured, you can't lift anything at all. There were a few common injuries they got, but that's a discussion topic for another day. But suffice to say, they hurt themselves, they couldn't continue. They erred on the side of meathead. Now, we don't have in the data very many people who erred on the side of wuss, and that's because they tend not to report their data. In my practice, about half of all the inquiries I get from males are, I got up to 100, 110 kilogram squat and then I backed off to work on form. And 12 months later, they're still working on form. Somehow their form is never quite good enough to add another 2.5 kgs to the bar. They erred on the side of wussing out. Those sorts of people would not report their data. But they're, judging by the general population, they're probably the majority. So yeah, when should you work through the pain and when should you rest? When it's sore, you just ignore it and keep going. When you are hurt, when it is an actual injury, as diagnosed by a medical professional, then providing the medical professional their advice allows you to train. In that case, you look for something which does not cause you pain. Train in a way that does not cause you pain. Find a variation of the exercise. And that's why, for example, here we've got, you can just see to the side, is that black thing. That's a safety squat bar. So the person can put it over their shoulders and hold it there. So it enables them to squat even if they've got a wrist or an elbow injury, which would prevent their doing a back squat or a front squat. Most people don't like it. They say it's, you know, they feel like the kid who was at school wearing the retainer around his head, but they're still squatting, so it's all good in my eyes. So yeah, sore is not hurt. Get proper medical help, and then find something same but different, which does not offend you in the same way, or your body in the same way. Theo asks, is drinking beer for breakfast good for lifting? No, Theo. Schnapps. And only right before deadlifts. Funny story. Really, the beginning and end of all nutrition questions is, what did you have for breakfast? If the person has some answer like, you know, oats and some fruit, or an omelette with some veggies, I don't really need to ask them what they had for lunch. They've probably got it right. If their answer is nothing, some coffee, well, my first suggestion is have breakfast. Oh, what should I have? I don't care, have Fruit Loops, but start by having breakfast. Once you're having breakfast and you're in the habit of having breakfast, we can worry about what you eat. But basically, yeah, if you get breakfast right, the rest of the day is going to be right. And if you get that wrong, probably the rest of your day is going to be a mess too. Best answer I ever got was a couple of VBs. So already by the time he'd come to do a workout with me at 7 a.m, he'd had 2 heavy beers. Do I really need to ask him what he did the rest of the day? Well, that's the world that I live in as a trainer, the people that I have to work with. Jesse asks, protein timing, does it matter? So for those who don't know, the theory is that that if, for example, you have your protein right after a workout when your muscles are freaking out because they've just been damaged by the workout, that you'll grow better. Or perhaps if you have protein right before bed, that the protein will go into your body and as your body rests and recovers, and you'll heal up better and get better gains. It doesn't really matter. Protein timing doesn't really matter. There have been a few studies on this, and what they find is, you know, when they ask questions like, you know, if you're having 180 grams of protein a day, does it make a difference if you have it in 6 lots of 30 grams or in 1 lot of 180 grams? And basically, if the protein's kind of evenly spread over the day, and if there's some immediately after the workout, you seem to get slightly better gains than if you have it all in one go. But it's only a small difference. It's sort of like, you know, 24 previously untrained college-age adult males were split into 2 groups. One had the protein immediately after the workout, the other just had it for dinner later in the day. And then one group got 1.5 kilograms of lean mass during that time, and the other group got 1 kilogram of lean mass the other time. But there's error bars. So in that group of people who got 1.5 kilos, some got 2.5, some got half, some got none, and so on. So it's more like 1.5 kilograms plus or minus half a kilo versus 1 kilo plus or minus half a kilo. So they actually overlap quite a lot, and the individual response to training varies more than the difference made by when you had your protein. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, because most people don't have any clue how much protein they're having each day. So if you get 2 guys and one guy's having a steady 150 grams, for example, of protein every day, and another guy doesn't know. So in practice, one day he has 60 grams of protein, another day he has 200 grams of protein. Which one's going to get the better gains? It's going to be the one that's fairly consistent. Likewise, the average might be lower. So one guy has a lower average and another guy has a higher average, even though they vary a lot day to day, the one who gets more overall is going to get more gains than the one who gets less, regardless of the timing. It's the 80-20 rule once again, with 80% of your results coming from 20% of the different things that you can do. So the first thing that a person needs to do is to be looking at eating good food overall, having their 3 serves of meat or fish or eggs a day, their 3 cups of veggies, and so on and so forth, as per the Australian Dietary Guidelines. And beyond that, if that proves not enough, having a bit more protein. Most people don't have that sorted yet. So exactly when they have their protein powder or the Nutella sandwiches or whatever, it isn't that important. It's going to be minor stuff. Now, if you've got 80% of your possible results, well then, okay, maybe that stuff is going to start mattering. But I haven't yet seen anyone who had all that stuff on point and had 80% of their possible results yet. Jonah asks, mind-muscle connection, does it work? How effective is it? Okay, this is an old bodybuilding idea that, for example, when you're doing a bench press, you focus particularly on squeezing your pecs as you press up. The idea being that they get a harder contraction and therefore get more stimulus to grow. You know, as C.T. Fletcher, I command you to grow. This is the theory. Surprisingly few studies have looked at this. When they looked at it, they looked to see if there was more EMG. So they put little electrodes on the muscle and see how much current is going through, because the little electrical impulses, voltage, little electrical impulses go across the muscle as it contracts, and that's what makes the muscle contract. So the theory is more impulses, more zap at the voltmeter means there's a harder contraction of the muscle happening. What they find is if a person concentrates on using, say, their pecs during a bench press or using their triceps during a bench press, you get more muscular activation of that muscle during the movement. And you don't get less of the other muscles involved. That's what happens when you use lighter weights. Once you get to about 80% of your 1 rep max, all the muscles are just involved the same as if you'd never concentrated on it at all. But of course, bodybuilders will tend to use light to moderate weights and do zillions and zillions of reps. So they will feel a harder contraction, and with enough harder contractions, they'll feel more of a pump in the muscle afterwards. Does this translate to greater gains in the long run? Nobody has studied it. As far as I could tell, nobody has studied such a thing. And in our gym, we train for strength rather than particularly for size. So we are using some loads around 80%. So the loads are heavy enough that the muscles don't kind of differentiate themselves. They just all work together to lift the weight. So yeah, more of a bodybuilding thing. So there is some truth to it. The muscles do activate more. Does that lead to greater gains and bigger chesticles? We don't know. The bodybuilders think so, but there may be some other factors in there. They're better living through chemistry, for example. Where are we now? Manny asks, the IPF has a sub-junior category for age 18 and under. What is the youngest age client you would consider training and why? The youngest client I would train in all circumstances is 18 years old. And that is because, or maybe 16, yeah, probably 16. Because successful training requires that the person wants to be there. Younger than 16, it's unlikely to be the kid. Okay, the kids naturally have interest in 1,001 different things. That's children. If they're focused on anything for more than a couple of months, it's mum and dad. And I don't want to deal with ambitious helicopter parents who are convinced their child is the next Mozart or Serena Williams. The kid's fine, but I don't want to deal with the parents. Younger than 16, you're dealing with the parents. So. Jason asks, thoughts on intermittent fasting? Studies have shown it aids in muscle growth and fat loss. The first thing I'll do, Jason, is correct you. There are no studies showing that intermittent fasting helps in muscle growth. It does help in weight loss, which includes both fat loss and muscle loss. Now, intermittent fasting, for those who don't know, the concept is that you go without food for part of the day, set hours during the day, or part of the week, or you have much less food, and then the rest of the time you eat whatever you damn well want. So there are two basic kinds where you fast for so many hours in the day. Well, at time of recording this, it's Ramadan. Are Muslims all jacked? No. In fact, I was just reading an article on the ABC today with some dietitians and some leaders of the Muslim community saying it's actually a problem that many of them gain weight in this time because it's a big family gathering. You know, if you're only having one big meal a day, they tend to have a little bit of breakfast, nothing all day, and then a big dinner once the sun goes down. If you're only having one meal during the day and it's a religious festival, well, what are all religious festivals? Let's get together the family and community and have a big meal. So they end up eating large amounts of sugary, fatty foods, and they actually end up eating more in total calories than they do normally. So that's why they're not all jacked. In fact, some of them gain weight. So we know that the day-to-day intermittent fasting doesn't work. Plus, all of us intermittently fast when we go to bed. We don't wake up in the middle of the night and go and get something to eat most of the time. So it's typically 12 hours, sometimes 16 hours, where we don't eat. And we're not all jacked. So we know that intermittent fasting during the day doesn't work. Now, when you pick a couple of days a week where you're going to eat very little or nothing, and then eat the rest of the week, that does seem to work for weight loss. For example, the theory of one is that you eat like 25% your normal calories, so 2,000 calorie a day average, might be 500 calorie days. You do that a couple of days a week, and then the other days you eat what you want. You might think that if you're only having 25% calories on Monday, that on Tuesday you'll have 175% to compensate. But people tend not to. They tend to have 125 to 150%. So overall, they are having slightly less. In other words, overall, they are at an energy deficit. And that is what causes weight loss. An energy deficit. So all the other stuff that you hear about of paleo and Atkins and 5-2 diet and lemon detox and blah, 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 all the ones which work because you eat less overall. I wish it were more complicated. I could charge more. But that's what it comes down to. All the diets which work because overall you're eating less. And while you are losing weight, you will lose some fat and some muscle. If you lose weight very fast, a large proportion of what you lose will be muscle and bone and so on. If you lose weight while not lifting, a large proportion of what you lose will be lean mass. So if you lose weight slowly and lift weights while doing so, you will preserve most of your lean mass. And most of us, of course, want to lose fat and hold on to the muscle. But intermittent fasting does not aid in muscle growth. Quite the contrary. You don't grow muscles by consuming less energy than you expend. Unless you are obese, then instead of getting the energy from your food, your body gets the energy from your body fat. But if you're a healthy body fat level, your body doesn't do that so much, so you can't lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. That's just obese people who just started weight training. But people who are already a healthy body weight or within shouting distance of it and or are experienced in weight training are not going to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. Sorry. And that's why bodybuilders traditionally have bulking and cutting phases. And that's a topic for another day. Now, where are we? Oh, now revisiting an old question. Manny asked about military influence on my training style. And I was thinking about this some more. He asked that last week and I answered it, but I was thinking about it some more during the week. And I think there have been some positive influences, as much as like the army physical training is stupid. The teaching of other things like weapon drills and parade ground drill and navigation and all those basic soldier skills, the way they teach it, there is a method that they use to teach it. They say, in this lesson you will be taught X. The reason that you are taught X is so that you as individual soldiers can do Y. This lesson will be given in 3 parts. And then at the end, they go through each part. And at the end of each part, they've tossed out some facts. The muzzle velocity of this rifle is 880 meters per second or something. And then they say, what is the muzzle velocity of this weapon? Do not raise your hand, I shall nominate. And they point. Number 2, what is the muzzle velocity of this weapon? And they answer. And then they get to the end of the lesson and they say, are there any final questions or doubtful points on X? And for each subject, they've got a pamphlet saying these are the things that you have to teach. And you follow that format and you tick those boxes of the things that are taught and people learn it. And this is a way that some even dumb people can teach other dumb people things in this that they know in this way. So that was actually a positive influence on me. The idea of having a system of things that you want to teach, and a systematic way of teaching it. That was a positive influence. And that, boys and girls, may be about it, I think. Sorry. Someone who wishes to remain anonymous, asked about efficiency. What efficient training was and about optimal bar paths and stuff. There's a lot of talk about optimal bar paths and technique and so on. There's some use to this, otherwise I wouldn't have a job, but don't get carried away with it. Lifting is inherently inefficient. That's why we do it. To develop the ability to do better other inefficient things like run and climb and wrestle and throw a ball and pick up our kid and push the car when it's broken down and lift boxes to move house. Those are all inherently inefficient things. By being inefficient, we drive an adaptation. We stress our body and our body says, I don't want to be stressed that way again. And we drive an adaptation. I mean, if we wanted mechanical efficiency, we would just leave the weights on the floor. Is what it comes down to. A coach, a former starting strength coach, and that he dug up something I'd said in 2014, was saying, I think that being unable to squat or deadlift is as bad as being unable to read. He asked, do you still stand by that or have you changed your mind? Well, story time, Sean. One of my first clients was a woman on a walking frame. Had she squatted since youth, she would never have needed that. And nowadays I get people just in their 40s in debilitating pain, which could have been avoided had they been active, but they spent the last 20 years sitting at a desk. Low muscle mass and strength is connected with so much disease and misery. Really, honestly. Lots of people spend a lot of their day in pain. And if they were to move their bodies and get stronger and fitter, they would be in less pain. People's knees hurt, people's backs hurt. Being physically active is connected to having lower rates of heart disease, of cancer, of Parkinson's disease, of Alzheimer's disease. Being stronger and fitter is connected with being independent for longer. So instead of being in a nursing home when you're 70, maybe not until you're 90, if at all. Life is better if you are stronger and fitter. A few weeks ago, I was pushing my daughter's pram. We just got off the train and we're going along the path. And there's a couple of council guys doing the survey or whatever with their tripod across most of the path. And this woman, an obese woman on a mobility scooter with swollen dark calves and ankles, obviously diabetic with claudication and so on, so poor circulation in the lower limbs. You know, that diabetes, there's 1.1 million Australians with type 2 diabetes, which is mostly avoidable. It's mostly avoidable, or if you do get it, you can get it in the last 5 years of your life rather than getting it in your 30s or something. And that causes numbness of the lower limbs, like leprosy or something. And so if they're not doing regular feet checks, they get infected. They get wounded and it becomes an infection. And amputation. There's 4,400 diabetes-associated amputations in the country every year. And just doing a half-hour walk every day would mean that just doesn't happen to you, or is very unlikely to happen. Or if it happens when you're 80 instead of happening when you're 50. It's just not fucking necessary to be like that. So this woman's in her mobility scooter and she tries to go around the guys with the tripod, and then it kind of goes off the path a little bit and gets stuck in the muddy grass. And then for whatever reason, the battery was dead or something, it stops working, it stops moving. And she's, pushing the little electric lever to make it go, and it's not. And the council guys look a bit uncomfortable and try to help her and make it start going again. And it doesn't work. And then they try to move it, but the thing's a couple of 100 kilos and she's, 100 kilos or something herself. So they just can't move the damn thing. And she looks at them and says helplessly, "What do I do now?" So I took me and my daughter in the pram and just moved around her and left her to it because she chose that. So being illiterate with reading and writing, that will affect your life right from the age of 10 or 12. You can probably get away with it till then. But it will strongly affect your life and greatly limit your opportunities, and you'll have less quality of life. Not being physically active, on the other hand, takes till at least 30 to fuck you up. You can get away with it for a long time because young children are naturally active unless their parents hold them back. They naturally squat, they naturally run and climb and wrestle each other and throw clods of dirt at each other's heads and stuff. So they will build a certain natural amount of strength and fitness just from the normal activities of childhood. That plus sheer youth and youthful resilience will keep them going up until 30 or so. But beyond there, they have to make a conscious effort to be active. So, and if they're not, then they end up like that woman, stuck in a damn mobility scooter, helplessly. God knows what happened to her. Probably the fireys had to come and haul her ass up. It's just not necessary. There's a small percentage of people that mobility scooters are genuinely necessary for when they're injured through no fault of their own, blah, blah, blah. But most of them are just weak. And that is not necessary. Just as it's not necessary to be illiterate in today's society because we have free primary school, free secondary school, and we have free adult literacy classes. It's just not necessary. So if you're weak and you're unfit, it's because you've chosen to be. There are people out there who can help you. You do not need to be movement illiterate. And you are hurting yourself and you are hurting your family and your spouse, who is going to have to wipe your bum one day when you're too weak to get out of bed. You're letting yourself, your family, and society down. And it is just not fucking necessary. So yes, being unable to squat or deadlift as an adult is as bad as being unable to read. Now, that does not mean squatting 200 kilograms, but it does mean being able to perform a below parallel squat with just your own body weight. That is not setting the bar very high for people. It takes surprisingly little activity to improve people's lives. And that is what I've dedicated my professional life to, making people's lives better in that way. With weights, you can change people's lives. L'chaim. Well, after that inspirational speech, that should be enough for you. Good night, guys.